There are films that thrill, films that entertain, and then there is The Hitcher, a story that feels like a warning whispered on an empty stretch of highway. Released in 1986, it unfolds like a fever dream carved into the desert, beginning with an innocent favor to a stranger and spiraling into a nightmare that refuses to slow down even for a breath. Most road thrillers rely on noise, chaos, and spectacle. The Hitcher relies on something colder, a man who appears out of nowhere. A presence too calm to feel human. A predator whose smile carries the same weight as a blade. John Ryder doesn't stalk, boast, or explain. He simply arrives in intrusion without context, turning the open road into a corridor of dread. What makes him terrifying isn't what he does, but what he represents: the sudden collapse of safety in a place designed for freedom. But what happened behind the camera was just as uncanny. Strange decisions shaped the script. Controversial scenes provoked studio panic. Actors were pushed to emotional extremes. Entire sequences were softened, cut, or buried because they hit nerves no one expected. Even the desert locations contributed their own unease, swallowing sound, bending light, and making the production feel uncomfortably close to the film's own nightmare. And then there's the ending debated. Softened and reshaped under pressure, leaving behind two versions of truth. The one the audience knows, and the one that was nearly unleashed. Tonight we open that road again, because The Hitcher was never just a thriller. It was a myth, reborn in asphalt and moonlight, a story that leaves you glancing at every shadow on the shoulder of the highway. These are 20 weird, unsettling, and long-buried facts about The Hitcher 1986. Facts that reveal a film far stranger than the one you remember. Fact 1. The actor who became a threat without speaking. There's a moment early in production when the crew realized Rutger Hauer wasn't simply playing John Ryder. He was inhabiting him with an intensity that felt almost unsafe. His approach began with silence, not dramatic silence, but the kind that makes everyone in the room pay attention without knowing why. Even before cameras rolled, he carried himself like a man who had already crossed a line no one else could see. His co-star, C. Thomas Howell, spoke later about how unpredictable Hauer felt. Howell avoided rehearsing certain confrontations with him because Hauer had a habit of staring a little too long, tilting his head in a way that suggested he was studying Howell not as a colleague, but as prey. Crew members described walking past him on set and feeling a sudden chill, as if the temperature dropped a few degrees whenever he entered a scene. The transformation wasn't theatrical. Hauer could be joking with a technician one moment, then shift instantly into a still, emotionless presence. When the camera began to roll, he barely blinked. He barely breathed. He made everyone believe Ryder existed. The director encouraged this eerie spontaneity, refusing to explain Ryder's psychology, even in private discussions. Hauer agreed. He said a villain like Ryder shouldn't be decoded, he should remain a shadow that refuses definition. By the end of the second week, the cast didn't fear the stunt work, the weapons, or the desert isolation. They feared the quiet moments when Hauer slipped into character without warning, becoming the hitchhiker no one should ever stop for. Fact 2. The scene that nearly shut down the entire release. Every film has a moment the studio worries about. But The Hitcher had one the studio genuinely feared. It was the infamous truck scene, a sequence so disturbing that executives argued it would alienate audiences, damage the film's reputation, and possibly attract protests. Even during filming, crew members sensed it was pushing boundaries that 1980s cinema rarely approached. When early cuts were shown privately, reactions were immediate and extreme. Some viewers turned away. Others gasped audibly. A few walked out. Strangely, although many found the scene unbearable, they insisted afterward that the film wouldn't work without it. The brutality wasn't gratuitous, it revealed who Ryder truly was. It established the rules of his world. There aren't any. The studio tried everything to soften it. They demanded trims, alternate angles, and even complete removal. But every softened version weakened the emotional force, turning Ryder from a relentless nightmare into just another movie villain. The director fought back, arguing that the horror of the Hitcher depended on the moment when the audience realizes it has crossed a line it can't uncross. In the end, a fragile compromise was reached. The scene would remain, but reduced to the absolute minimum number of frames needed to preserve its meaning. International censors still targeted it. Several countries edited it heavily, and some theaters refused to screen the film unless the shot was removed entirely. Yet the irony remains. The very scene the studio feared most is the one that made the Hitcher unforgettable. Fact 3. A highway shoot. So dangerous, the crew braced for disaster. Filming on the open highway might appear simple, but for the Hitcher, it became a series of near disasters that pushed the crew to their limits. The desert roads chosen for the film were unpredictable stretches of cracked asphalt surrounded by nothing but wind dust and miles of unforgiving emptiness. The environment itself felt hostile. Many scenes required actors to be dangerously close to moving vehicles. With a modest budget, the production had fewer resources for controlled rehearsals, meaning the margin for error was razor thin. C. Thomas Howell recalled moments where he could feel the heat of a truck's engine passing just inches from where he stood. One misstep, one unnoticed patch of loose gravel, and the consequences could have been catastrophic. Windstorms were their constant enemy. Out of nowhere, gusts would slam into equipment, rattling metal rigs and sending sand cutting across exposed skin. A lighting tower collapsed during one storm landing so close to a stunt driver that several crew members screamed before realizing he was unharmed. After that, they doubled every safety measure they had. The worst scare came during a night shoot. The road was lit only by the headlights of the vehicles involved in the chase, and dust rising from the tires transformed the scene into a murky blur. A stunt car suddenly slid off its intended path, swerving toward a camera operator. The vehicle stopped only feet away. For several minutes after, no one spoke. Yet these risks created the film's authenticity. The tension audiences feel isn't fully staged. It's born from the genuine danger the cast and crew lived through. Fact 4. The original script was far darker than the film allowed. Before The Hitcher reached the screen, it existed as a script so bleak that nearly every studio refused to touch it. The earliest draft leaned heavily into psychological torment, shaping John Ryder as a figure who behaved less like a man and more like a philosophical threat, a presence meant to unravel anyone who crossed his path. In that version, Ryder wasn't mysterious, he was catastrophic. The original script included extended dialogues, where Ryder described past victims in disturbingly calm detail, not to evoke sympathy or horror, but to expose his chilling indifference. Other removed sequences hinted at symbolic or ritualistic patterns behind his actions, suggesting a twisted worldview rather than random violence. Executives who read the draft considered it unmarketable. They argued audiences needed some explanation for the villain's behavior, even if subtle. But the writer and director believed the absence of motive was the point, that true terror comes from unpredictability, not clarity. Despite heavy pressure, they protected the script's core Ryder's facelessness. Still, several disturbing scenes were removed to make the film less oppressive, including an early moment where Jim discovers evidence of Ryder stalking travelers long before their fateful meeting. Even stripped of its darkest elements, the film maintained the essence of that initial draft. It kept Ryder's unsettling calm, his cryptic philosophy, and his inhuman persistence. Yet those who saw the original pages insist one thing. Had the script been filmed exactly as written, The Hitcher would have been too disturbing for any 1980s audience to handle. Fact 5. A line of dialogue that Rutger Hauer created on the spot. Many remember John Ryder, not for what he does, but for what he says, short, sharp phrases delivered with unsettling calm. One of the film's most unforgettable lines wasn't in the script at all. Rutger Hauer invented it during filming, disrupting the rhythm of the scene and catching his co-star completely off guard. The production had been struggling to capture the emotional temperature of a tense confrontation. The director encouraged Hauer to experiment with quiet, hoping silence might carry the weight the scene needed. Instead, Hauer chose a different path. When the cameras rolled, he delivered an improvised line, soft, measured, and chilling enough that Hauer briefly forgot he was acting. Crew members watching the monitors felt the mood shift instantly. The new line didn't explain Ryder. It deepened the mystery. It made him feel deliberate, as though his violence came from conviction rather than impulse. The director recognized the power of that moment and kept it without hesitation. This wasn't the only improvisation. Hauer introduced subtle looks, small gestures, even pauses that transformed Ryder into something more haunting than the script suggested. He resisted traditional villain tropes, no shouting, no theatrics, opting for calm menace. His improvisations turned Ryder into a presence that felt as though he were choosing every word with unsettling precision. That one unscripted line became a cornerstone of the character. It didn't define him. It exposed him in the quietest and most terrifying way possible. Fact 6. Isolation on the desert set created problems no one anticipated. The haunting emptiness of the Hitcher owes much to its filming locations, stretches of desert highway so remote that the crew often felt cut off from the rest of the world. What audiences see as cinematic atmosphere was for the production team a series of logistical nightmares shaped by isolation. Communication equipment failed almost daily. Radios cut out without warning. Signals faded whenever the wind shifted. Entire departments found themselves stranded miles apart with no way to reach each other. One grip truck overheated on a distant section of road, leaving several crew members stuck in blistering heat until another vehicle stumbled upon them nearly an hour later. Scouting was equally treacherous. A stunt coordinator once walked off to check the terrain and vanished behind a ridge. By the time they found him, the sun had dipped low and the temperature had plunged dramatically. He later admitted he wasn't lost, he simply couldn't hear the crew calling over the wind. Nights were worse. The desert became a black void, the kind of darkness that swallows distance and warps sound. Crew members reported hearing faint noises, footsteps rustling, or voices carried by the wind. No one could agree if they were real or tricks of the environment. These conditions shaped the performances more than expected. The actors stepped into scenes already tense, already unsettled, feeling the isolation their characters were meant to experience. The road didn't just serve the story, it participated in it. The result is a film where the environment doesn't feel like a backdrop, it feels like an accomplice. Fact 7. A score built on silence instead of music. Most thrillers lean on music to build tension. But The Hitcher chose something far riskier. It weaponized silence. Composer Mark Isham approached the soundtrack with an unconventional philosophy that fear grows louder when the world goes quiet. Instead of creating melodies or grand orchestral cues, he crafted minimalist pulses, faint hums, and tones that barely register consciously. The result didn't guide the audience, it unsettled them. Isham experimented with sounds pulled from unusual sources. Metallic shrieks stretched beyond recognition, distant echoes captured in desert locations, and low frequencies designed to sit beneath the threshold of awareness. Much of the score is less music and more atmospheric pressure. It feels like the desert itself is exhaling around the characters. The filmmakers removed entire planned music cues, replacing them with raw highway noise engines, wind gravel. They believed the emptiness made every moment feel more vulnerable, more exposed. Even Ryder's presence has no recognizable theme. Isham refused to give him one, explaining that a villain like Ryder should feel like a glitch in reality, not a character with a song. The studio initially complained the soundtrack felt unfinished. But the director insisted that the gaps, the spaces between sounds, were precisely what made the film unique. In a movie built on dread, the silence became its loudest voice. Factage. A breakdown scene that nearly caused the lead actor to walk away. C. Thomas Howell delivered one of the most convincing portrayals of unraveling fear in 1980s cinema. But part of that performance came from a moment that pushed him to his breaking point. During a crucial emotional collapse scene, the director urged Howell to reach deeper to access genuine panic rather than acted. The pressure was immense, and the environment only amplified it. When the cameras rolled, something inside Howell shifted. His breathing turned erratic, his voice cracked, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. The scene ended, but Howell didn't recover right away. He walked off set abruptly, refusing to speak, sitting alone on the sand with his head down. Crew members gathered at a distance, unsure whether they had witnessed powerful acting or an actual psychological fracture. For nearly an hour, Howell didn't respond to anyone. He later described the moment as falling into a mental freefall, feeling cornered by Ryder, not as a character, but as a force. The director debated rewriting upcoming scenes, concerned Howell might not return. Eventually, Howell came back quieter, rawer, and visibly shaken, agreeing to finish the film, but requesting fewer takes for emotional sequences. That breakdown, though painful, altered his performance for the rest of production. From that moment forward, Jim Halsey's fear wasn't theatrical. It was lived. It was remembered. The audience sees fear. Howell felt it. Fact 9. A deleted scene that would have changed. Ryder's entire mythology, hidden deep within early cuts, was a deleted scene that would have altered the entire perception of John Ryder. It involved Jim discovering a small, worn photograph tucked inside Ryder's jacket. The picture showed a family beside a car on a lonely road, their faces violently scratched out. On the back, written in scrawled handwriting, were the words, "You should never stop." The scene suggested an origin, or at least a hint of one. It implied a tragedy, a motive, a wound that perhaps birthed Ryder's cruelty. It added layers of psychological detail that made him more human, and that was precisely the problem. When screened for early audiences, the scene drew criticism for explaining too much. Viewers felt Ryder became smaller, less terrifying once given even a shadow of a past. What made him horrifying was his emptiness, the sense that he came from nowhere and carried nothing but malice. Rutger Hauer agreed. He believed Ryder should function like a storm or a myth, not a man with a grievance. Giving him a reason, he said, betrays the entire point. The director ultimately removed the scene, locking it away and preserving Ryder's essence. Without a past, he became impossible to interpret, a walking question the film refused to answer. Sometimes a mystery becomes scarier when nothing fills the silence behind it. Fact 10. The ending the audience saw was not the ending first conceived. The final moments of The Hitcher feel definitive, a violent confrontation, a brief silence, and the suggestion that Jim has regained control. But that clarity was not part of the film's original design. Earlier drafts planned a conclusion far more ambiguous, one that would leave viewers questioning whether Ryder's influence could ever truly end. The planned ending showed Jim collapsing beside the wreckage, only for the camera to drift across the scene and reveal that Ryder's body was gone. No explanation, no final shot of certainty, just a vanishing act that hinted at something beyond human resilience. Studio executives recoiled when they read it. After the film's relentless intensity, they believed the audience needed an endpoint, not an open wound. They feared that an unresolved ending would make the movie feel incomplete, too eerie for mainstream viewers. The director resisted, arguing that ambiguity would preserve the mythic quality of Ryder, transforming him into an enduring force rather than a defeated antagonist. A compromise emerged, but even the filmed ending contains subtle choices that keep the door slightly open. Jim never checks Ryder's pulse. The camera lingers on Jim's reaction instead of the body. The moment feels final, yet strangely unverified. Years later, the director admitted his personal preference for the original ending, one that would have turned The Hitcher into a modern ghost story rather than a thriller. But the version that made it to theaters still carries traces of that earlier vision. There's a reason the ending feels unsettling long after the credits roll. The story concludes, yes, but the nightmare never fully shuts its eyes. Fact 11. Police departments objected to the film for an unexpected reason. When The Hitcher debuted, it wasn't just critics or audiences who reacted strongly. Real police departments expressed discomfort with how the film portrayed law enforcement. Their concern wasn't rooted in the violence. It stemmed from the ease with which Ryder overwhelms trained officers. Several agencies argued the film painted police as poorly equipped, too trusting, and dangerously incapable of handling a threat like Ryder. Internal memos from the period revealed frustration that Ryder seemed to glide past every barrier. He disarms officers, manipulates protocol, and escapes custody with a precision that feels supernatural. For departments concerned about public image, the portrayal felt unfair, even damaging. The filmmakers pushed back, explaining that the narrative required Ryder to be a disruptive force. He wasn't meant to reflect real-world criminals, but to represent the breakdown of order itself. The director even instructed actors playing police officers to follow authentic procedures, to emphasize that the officers weren't incompetent. They were confronting a threat operating outside the boundaries of normal behavior. Ironically, early audiences felt the opposite of what police departments feared. Many viewers found the realistic responses of law enforcement added to the movie's sense of dread. If highly trained professionals couldn't predict or stop Ryder, what chance did an ordinary traveler have? The controversy eventually faded, but it left an imprint on how the film was discussed. Ryder became more than a villain. He became the embodiment of the moment when systems fail and danger slips through the cracks. Fact 12. The most intense chase sequence was filmed without modern safety nets. The Hitcher's most breathtaking chase, a frantic nighttime pursuit across a near-empty highway, was crafted with almost no digital effects and minimal safety allowances. In the mid-1980s, productions relied heavily on practical stunts, and this sequence demanded precision that bordered on reckless. Vehicles sped at real highway speeds, and the stunt team had to coordinate movements with almost mathematical accuracy. A single late turn or misjudged skid could have turned the scene into a genuine disaster. Lighting was another issue. The desert's natural darkness swallowed everything beyond the reach of headlights. With dust rising from the asphalt, visibility dropped so severely that drivers sometimes saw only faint silhouettes. The cinematographer later described the shoot as filming inside a moving cloud. One near accident became infamous among the crew. During a sharp maneuver, a stunt car drifted off its intended path and veered dangerously close to a camera operator. The car stopped just short of hitting him, leaving the crew shaken into silence. After reviewing the footage, the director recognized the raw fear in the operator's reflexive flinch and insisted the shot remain as is. Despite the risks, the sequence became one of the film's defining moments. Because every movement, every swerve, every screech of tires is real. The tension is unmistakable. Viewers don't feel like they're watching a choreographed chase, they feel like they're witnessing survival in real time. The danger wasn't simulated. It was present in every frame. Fact 13. The casting choice that transformed the entire film. Today, it's impossible to picture anyone but Rutger Hauer as John Ryder. A presence so calm, so measured, so unnervingly confident that he reshaped the film around him. But Hauer wasn't the obvious choice when casting began. Early discussions centered on actors with softer charm or rising mainstream appeal. The studio wanted someone magnetic, someone recognizable, someone who fit a conventional mold of an 80s thriller antagonist. But the director rejected the idea of a charming villain. He wanted someone who walked into a room and shifted the atmosphere instantly. Not with theatrics, but with stillness. The casting team reviewed dozens of auditions before Hauer's photograph landed on the director's desk, a simple, candid shot. Yet it carried an intensity that caught his attention. When Hauer auditioned, he didn't perform the scene in typical fashion. Instead, he entered the room quietly, made eye contact, and delivered his lines with unsettling softness. The casting staff later described the moment as the air tightening. There was no raised voice, no dramatic gesture. Just deliberate calm, the kind that makes you step back without knowing why. Once cast, Hauer elevated Ryder beyond the script. He played him not as a man with a dark past, but as an idea, the embodiment of unpredictability. Every movement, every pause, every word was calculated to feel inevitable, as though Ryder existed long before the story and would continue long after it. Replacing him with another actor wouldn't just have changed the performance, it would have rewritten the film's DNA. Fact 14. A strange incident on set that shook the crew's nerves. Film productions often deal with unpredictable weather or equipment failures. But the Hitcher experienced something far stranger, an incident that left seasoned crew members unsettled for days. It happened during preparation for what should have been a routine shot, Jim's car sitting on the shoulder of a quiet road. Nothing dangerous, nothing complex. As the crew adjusted, lighting a metal road sign several meters away snapped from its post and slammed onto the ground with alarming force. There was no wind, no passing vehicle, no vibration from equipment. It fell as if pushed. For a moment, the crew froze, convinced something or someone had triggered it. When they inspected the sign, they found no cracks, no visible wear, nothing that explained why it collapsed. The desert was silent, and that silence made everything worse. Later, while reviewing test footage, someone noticed a faint shadow pass across the sign just before it fell. It moved quickly, almost imperceptibly. Technicians dismissed it as distortion or dust. But several crew members weren't convinced. No one else had been standing there. No equipment had blocked the light. And the crew had sealed off the road long before filming began. The director brushed off the event to avoid spooking the cast, but the tension lingered. Some crew avoided the spot afterward, especially at night. Others joked nervously that Ryder's spirit had visited the set. Whether coincidence or something stranger, the moment became part of the film's unofficial lore, a reminder that the desert keeps secrets of its own. Fact 15. The moral outrage that accidentally turned the film into a cult legend. When The Hitcher entered theaters, it walked straight into a storm of moral outrage. Critics accused the film of crossing ethical lines, claiming its violence lacked justification and its villain lacked humanity. Advocacy groups published angry statements arguing the film was too bleak for wide release. Some even warned it might inspire copycat cruelty, an accusation that struck the director as absurd but revealing of the film's impact. Much of the backlash centered on Ryder's motiveless brutality. Audiences were used to villains with trauma politics or revenge driving them. Ryder had none of that. His lack of motive, his emptiness, terrified critics more than any specific act of violence. It challenged their belief that stories should offer lessons or redemption. The Hitcher offered neither. Ironically, this condemnation fueled the film's legacy. Viewers who might never have noticed it became curious about the movie, causing so much controversy. VHS rentals surged. College screening groups showcased it as forbidden cinema. Fans debated Ryder's nature, dissecting scenes and spotting details long after critics had stopped shouting. What was intended as moral correction became a marketing engine. The film didn't become a cult classic. Despite the backlash, it became one because of it. Fact 16. The ancient road myth that quietly shaped the story. Long before The Hitcher was written, stories circulated across Europe about strangers appearing on lonely roads. Figures who tested travelers without warning, sometimes guiding them, sometimes destroying them. These tales existed centuries before highways, yet their spirit echoes unmistakably in John Ryder. Writers behind the film admitted they were fascinated by the archetype of the wandering stranger, a figure who materialized from nowhere and unsettled the moral order of anyone who crossed his path. In several old folk tales, the stranger's presence carried a challenge, a test of courage, judgment, or instinct. Some stories ended with travelers escaping after a single whispered warning. Others ended with disappearances, their belongings found neatly folded by the roadside. The villain wasn't a monster or bandit, he was a question no one wanted to answer. That unsettling ambiguity resonated deeply with the film's creators. Ryder's character follows the same tradition. He doesn't stalk Jim for revenge. He doesn't rob him. He doesn't demand money, information, or anything one might expect from a human antagonist. Instead, he behaves like a living reminder of these ancient legends, an embodiment of danger that has no origin point and no final form. The film never states this connection outright, but the fingerprints of the myth are everywhere. The sudden appearance, the calm demeanor, the way Ryder seems less like a man and more like a force carried by the road itself. Some myths warn travelers never to pick up strangers. The Hitcher shows what happens when someone ignores that warning. Fact 17. A prop gun incident that triggered a real moment of fear. There's a scene in The Hitcher where Jim confronts armed officers, a moment filled with chaos, panic, and confusion. What the audience doesn't know is that a real mishap occurred during one of the takes. A prop gun designed to fire blanks safely discharged with far more force and volume than expected due to a faulty chamber. The shot wasn't dangerous, but it was shockingly loud. Loud enough to jolt C. Thomas Howell out of character entirely. His reaction captured on camera wasn't planned. His flinch, the darting eyes, the instant freeze of his breath, all were genuine responses to that unexpected blast. For a brief moment, the boundary between performance and reality dissolved. Crew members rushed toward him, unsure whether he had been injured. Howell waved them off, but he remained visibly shaken, replaying the moment in his head. He later explained that the misfire struck something instinctive, something primal. It wasn't fear of the gun, it was the shock of unpredictability, the sudden awareness that even controlled environments can crack open without warning. The director reviewed the footage afterward and immediately knew he had captured something irreplaceable. Instead of reshooting, he kept the take, believing the authenticity heightened the emotional truth of the scene. It deepened Jim's vulnerability, grounding his terror in something painfully real. That misfire became one of those rare filmmaking accidents that enriched the final product, a moment where real fear bled into fiction, leaving its mark on the screen. Fact 18. Abandoned cars on set held disturbing stories of their own. To give the film its weathered, lonely visual identity, the production team sourced abandoned vehicles from impound lots and scrap yards, real desert casualties rather than polished studio props. These weren't clean shells rented for a shoot. They were vehicles with histories, accidents, disappearances, unresolved investigations. One car arrived with shattered glass still embedded in its seats and a rusted toolkit lying untouched in the trunk. Another had dried mud caked beneath the pedals, suggesting it had been driven off-road for miles before being left behind. The most unsettling vehicle carried an odor that made several crew members refuse to sit inside, an earthy metallic smell no one could quite place. Props teams cleared out personal belongings, faded toys, cracked photographs, scraps of clothing. One Polaroid showed a man posing beside a highway sign, the background almost identical to the film's shooting location. Whether coincidence or something stranger, no one could say. During inspection of one car, a mechanic discovered deep scratch marks on the underside of the trunk lid, sharp, desperate, unmistakably human. No one knew how long the car had been abandoned. No one wanted to know. The director insisted on using the vehicles, as they were believing their wear carried an authenticity that couldn't be recreated. Their presence in the background added a layer of silent dread, as if each car whispered its own untold story. In a film about a road filled with invisible dangers, these vehicles became more than props. They were relics of real encounters. Fragments of mysteries the desert never gave back. Fact 19. The unknown figure who appeared in a shot and was never identified. During post-production, editors reviewing a wide landscape shot noticed something they hadn't seen on set, a lone figure standing in the distance, half hidden, near a broken stretch of fence. The person didn't move, didn't signal, didn't look toward the camera. He simply stood there, still, as a shadow pinned to the horizon. At first, the team assumed a crew member had wandered into frame. But when they began asking around, no one admitted to being in that location, and no department had logged anyone working in that direction. The area had been secured before filming, meaning no civilians should have been anywhere near the set. The location manager insisted he swept that section of highway personally. The assistant director confirmed that all crew were accounted for during the shot. Yet the figure remained in the footage, too precise to be a trick of light, too human to ignore. The editor froze the frame and zoomed in, revealing the outline of a coat that flickered as though catching the wind. However, the on-set weather logs recorded no gusts that day. Some speculated it was a hiker who approached unnoticed. Others claimed it was a visual distortion caused by heat ripples. But no one could explain why the figure didn't move as the camera trucked past, or why he disappeared entirely in the next angle. Removing him digitally wasn't possible in the mid-1980s, so the director chose to leave the figure in believing it added an uncanny energy to the scene. To this day, the identity of the watcher remains unknown. A silent observer on a deserted road, perhaps the eeriest extra the film never cast. Fact 20. The film's failure at release became the key to its cult resurrection. When The Hitcher first reached theaters, it did not arrive as a celebrated thriller. It was misunderstood, harshly criticized, and overshadowed by flashier films with easier marketing hooks. The studio wasn't sure how to position it. Critics condemned its bleakness. Many theaters scheduled it for minimal showings, assuming audiences wouldn't connect with a story that refused to explain itself or offer comfort. Ironically, this lukewarm reception became the source of its long-term power. After the film's short theatrical run, it began circulating in late-night cable slots and dusty rental shelves where unsuspecting viewers discovered it without the noise of critical opinion. VHS tapes passed from hand to hand. College groups screened it as a dare. Horror fans whispered about its intensity, often describing it as the movie that felt too dangerous for theaters. Its reputation grew not through advertising, but through fascination. The film's moral ambiguity, its portrayal of evil without motive, its atmosphere of suffocating isolation, all the qualities that frightened critics became the very reasons audiences couldn't forget it over time. The Hitcher stopped being the film that failed to impress and became the film people sought out, specifically because it felt unfiltered, uncompromising, and unlike anything Hollywood usually allowed. Word of mouth carried it farther than marketing ever could. The film did not achieve cult status despite its rocky debut. It achieved cult status because of it. Bonus fact: the lost audition tape that revealed a far more terrifying Ryder. Before the production ever settled on Rutger Hauer, there was another audition, one almost no one outside the early casting circle has ever heard about. This tape featured an actor whose name was never logged, whose paperwork was misplaced, and whose performance left the small viewing group deeply uncomfortable. Unlike Hauer's icy restraint, this actor approached Ryder as someone volatile, unhinged, and erratically violent. The energy he brought into the room didn't feel like performance. It felt like intrusion. According to those who saw the tape, the audition began normally. Then the actor shifted, suddenly speaking in a tone that wavered between a whisper and a near scream. He slammed his hand on the table at one point, without warning, causing a casting assistant to flinch so hard the camera rattled. He improvised entire passages of dialogue, none of which appeared in the script, but all of which carried a disturbingly intimate hostility. His eyes rarely blinked. His breathing came in ragged bursts. The moment that haunted the casting team occurred near the end of the recording. The actor paused mid-sentence, leaned toward the lens, and stared directly into it. Expression blank, posture rigid. The room went silent. Even after the take ended, the silence lingered heavy and uncomfortable. When the director reviewed the footage later, he agreed the performance was powerful, but wrong for the film. He didn't want a chaotic villain. He wanted inevitability, not volatility. Quiet horror, not loud madness. The tape was archived, then misplaced during a studio relocation. Some say it was lost. Others claim it was intentionally removed. All that remains is a memory of a version of John Ryder, so disturbing that had it been chosen, the film might never have reached audiences at all. The open highway has always promised escape distance, silence, the illusion of safety stretching endlessly ahead. But The Hitcher leaves us with a different vision, a reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself, and that the wrong stranger can change the shape of a life in a single moment. If these hidden stories shifted the way you see the film or the way you look at an empty road. Tell me in the comments which fact stayed with you the longest, and let me know which film you want us to uncover next. After all, every story leaves a shadow. Some just take longer to fade.